This put her in just about the right frame of mind for the cursing. It was said that once upon a time this had been done on a living, breathing subject, at least at the start of the event, but that wasn't right for a family day out, and for several hundred years the cursed had been directed at Unlucky Charlie, who was, however you looked at it, nothing more than a scarecrow. And since curses are generally directed at the mind of the cursed, this presented a major problem, because even "May your straw go moldy and your carrot fall off" didn't make much of an impression on a pumpkin, but points were given for general style and inventiveness. There wasn't much pressure for those in any case. Everyone knew what counted, and it wasn't Unlucky Charlie. One year, Granny Weatherwax had made the pumpkin explode. No one had ever worked out how she'd done it. Someone would walk away at the end today, and everyone would know that they were the winner, whatever the points said. You could win the witch with the pointiest hat prize and the broomstick dressage, but that was just for the audience. What counted was the trick you'd been working on all summer. Nanny had drawn last place at number 19. A lot of witches had turned up this year. News of Granny Weatherwax's withdrawal had got around, and nothing moves faster than the news in the occult community, since it doesn't have to travel at ground level. Many pointy hats moved and nodded among the crowds. Witches are among themselves generally as sociable as cats, but, as also with cats, there are locations and times and neutral grounds where they meet at something like peace. And what was going on was a sort of slow, complicated dance. The witches walked around saying hello to one another and rushing to meet newcomers, and innocent bystanders might have believed that here was a meeting of old friends, which, at one level, it probably was. But Nanny watched through a witch's eyes and saw the subtle positioning, the careful weighing up, the little changes of stance, the eye contact finely tuned by intensity and length. And when a witch was in the arena, especially if she was comparatively unknown, all the others found some excuse to keep an eye on her, preferably without appearing to do so. It was like watching cats. Cats spend a lot of time carefully eyeing one another. When they have to fight, that's merely to rubber stamp something that's already been decided in their heads. Nanny knew this, and she also knew most of the witches to be kind, on the whole, gentle to the meek, generous to the deserving. The undeserving got more than they bargained for, and by and large quite dedicated to a life that really offered more kicks than kisses. Not one of them lived in a house made of confectionery, although some of the conscientious younger ones had experimented with various crisp breads. Even children who deserved it were not slammed into their ovens. Generally, they did what they'd always done, smoothed the passage of their neighbors into and out of the world, and helped them over some of the nastier hurdles in between. You needed to be a special kind of person to do that. You needed a special kind of ear, because you saw people in circumstances where they were inclined to tell you things, like where the money is buried, or who the father was, or how come they'd gotten a black eye again. You need a special kind of mouth, the kind that stayed shut. Keeping secrets made you powerful. Being powerful earned you respect. Respect was hard currency. And within this sisterhood, except that it wasn't a sisterhood, it was a loose assortment of chronic non-joiners, a group of witches wasn't a coven, it was a small war. There was always this awareness of position. It had nothing to do with anything the other world thought a status. Nothing was ever said, but if an elderly witch died, the local witches would attend her funeral for the last words, then go solemnly home alone, with the insistent thought in the back of their minds, I moved up one. And newcomers were watched very, very carefully.
"Morning, Mrs. Ogg," said a voice behind her. "I trust you are well."
"Oh, how'd you do, Mrs. Shimmy?" said Nanny, turning her mental filing system. Threw up a card. Clarity Shimmy lives over towards Cutshade with her old mom. Takes snuff. Good with animals. How's your mother keeping?
We buried her last month, Mrs. Ogg.
Nanny Ogg quite liked Clarity because she didn't see her very often.
Oh, dear, but I'll tell her you asked about her anyway, said Clarity.
She glanced briefly towards the ring.
Who's the fat girl on now? Got a backside on her like a bowling ball on a short seesaw.
"Oh, that's Agnes Knit."
That's a good cursing voice she got there. You know you've been cursed with a voice like that.
"Oh, yeah, she's been blessed with a voice for cursing," she said. "Esme Weatherax and me gave her a few tips."
Clarity's head turned. At the far edge of the field a small pink shape sat alone behind the lucky dip. It did not seem to be drawing a big crowd, and Clarity leaned closer. What's she, doing?
"I don't know," said Nanny. "I think she's decided to be nice about it."
Esme? Nice about it?
Yeah," said Nanny. It didn't sound any better now that she was telling someone.
Clarity stared at her. Nanny saw her make a little sign with her left hand and then hurry off. The pointy hats were bunching now. There were little groups of 3 or 4. You could see the points come together, cluster in an animated conversation, and then open out again like a flower, and turn towards the distant blob of pinkness. Then a hat would leave the group and head off purposefully to another one, where the process would start all over again. It was a bit like watching very slow nuclear fission. There was a lot of excitement, and soon there would be an explosion. Every so often someone would turn and look at Nanny, so she hurried away among the sideshows until she fetched up beside the stall of dwarf Zack Zack Strong in the Arm, maker and purveyor of occult knickknackery to the more impressionable. He nodded at her cheerfully over the top of a display saying, "Lucky horseshoes, $2 each."
"Hello, Mrs. Ogg,"
he said. Nanny realized she was flustered.
"Oh, what's so lucky about 'em?" she said, picking up a horseshoe.
"I get $2 for each of 'em,"
said Strong in the Arm. "Oh, and that makes 'em lucky?"
"Lucky for me,"
said Strong in the Arm.
"I expect you'll be wanting one too, Mrs. Ogg. I'd have fetched along another box if I'd known they'd been so popular. Some of the ladies have bought too."
And there was an inflection on the word ladies.
"Oh, witches have been buying lucky horseshoes?" said Nanny.
"Like there's no tomorrow,"
said Zack Zack. He frowned for a moment. They had been witches after all.
"Will there be a tomorrow,
he added. "I'm nearly... Oh, that's Granny. That's Nanny. Granny. It's Granny. It's Nanny now."
"Oh, I'm nearly certain of it,"
said Nanny, which didn't seem to comfort him.
"Suddenly been doing a roaring trade in protective herbs too,"
said Zack Zack. And being a dwarf, which meant that he'd seen the flood as a marvelous opportunity to sell towels, he added,
"Can I interest you, Mrs. Ogg?"
Nanny shook her head. If trouble was going to come from the direction everyone had been looking, then a sprig of rue wasn't going to be much help. A large oak tree would be better, but only maybe. The atmosphere was changing. The sky was a wide, pale blue, but there was thunder on the horizons of the mind. The witches were uneasy. With so many in one place, the nervousness was bouncing from one to another and, amplified, rebroadcasting it to everyone. It meant that even ordinary people who thought that a rune was a dried plum were beginning to feel deep, existential worry, the kind that causes you to snap at your kids and want to drink. Nanny peered through a gap between a couple of stalls. The pink figure was still sitting patiently, a little crestfallen, behind the barrel. There was, as it were, a huge queue of no one at all. Then Nanny scuttled from the cover of one tent to another till she could see the produce stand. It had already been doing a busy trade, but there, forlorn in the middle of the cloth, was a pile of terrible cakes and the jar of jam. Some wag had chalked up a sign beside it. "Get the spoon out of the jar, 3 tries for a halfpenny." She thought she'd been careful to stay concealed, but she heard the straw rustle behind her. The committee had tracked her down.